I don't know. You want to, let's just wait until, put it on the committee.
Good morning, everyone. We'll call the August 9th Crow Wing County Board of Commissioners meeting to order. If you join us for the pledge in a moment's silence.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next item is open forum. We do have some forms filled out, but these are on our agenda. So at the time that we'll be discussing, you'll have the ability to come up and speak then. Okay. Is there any other open forum? Anybody else? Seeing none, we will move on to the review and approval of the July 26th board meeting.
Motion to approve, Mr. Chairman?
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Coring, second by Commissioner Barrows. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Review and approve today's agenda. No changes.
Mr. Chairman, being that there's no changes, I would approve the agenda as submitted here.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Coring, second by Commissioner Franzine. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Consent agenda. Any questions, comments?
Motion to approve.
I'll second.
Motion by Commissioner Franzine, second by Commissioner Brecken. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Oops. We're a little...
We're really early today.
Our first public hearing scheduled for 9:15, so we've got a couple of minutes to kill. We can...
It looks like we'd go to county administrator because the
Okay, we have no
other two aren't here.
County administrator.
Can you talk for 15?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, yesterday there was a senior management team meeting. As you can imagine, at this time of the year, budget. That's pretty much all we talk about. You're going to get an update from Nick on Thursday as to where we're at in the budget. It's a process, and so we always start with a higher number than we know is going to pass muster with the board. We're working at whittling that number down, slowly but surely, to try to hit the budget target, which we will hit this year, of under 3% of a levy increase. So we continue to work on that. Those are tough conversations. These guys are essentially competing for the same resources. And so having conversations about the give and take between the needs of the departments and what the organization's priorities are is a tough conversation, but one that a group of grown-ups ought to be able to have, and they do. So it's hard to watch them going through the process because it's, they're each trading. But in the end of the day, I think it probably produces a better result for us because instead of them competing surreptitiously for those resources, they're competing very transparently for those resources. We also had a conversation about Docusign campus-wide. You've probably all seen Docusign. It's the document signing software that we use. And we have one copy of it that comes with our agenda management software. And so any contracts that come through for board approval or whatnot, we can route them electronically for signature. It used to take days, if not a week or longer, to try to get signatures routed around for approvals. Now that we can do it electronically, they're sent simultaneously to everybody who needs to sign, and what we find is those electronic signatures get turned around much more quickly. So we can get documents signed within a day or two instead of waiting 2 weeks or something of the sort. We have enough of the Docusign licenses, we think, right now. There may be some pockets, land services, community services, maybe generating some contracts where it would be beneficial for us. So we're just looking at it. It has worked very, very well for us in the areas that we currently have it, and looking at whether or not there are applications beyond that make good sense for us. And that is what we talked about. Happy to answer questions about that or anything else related to county government.
Any questions?
Nope.
Mr. Chair, no questions for the county administrator. I see we've got lots of time. Would you want me to tell you how I got interested in politics?
I'd love to hear that.
Mr. Chair, I object.
But, Mr. Chair, I'm trying to be funny, but the county engineer is here. I guess I'd like to have Tim, maybe, being that we have time, I always like to get an update, because I know that I'm really happy that there's been a lot of roads down in my district that have gotten paved and resurfaced, and so, Tim, a little update. I know I was just talking to you about 131, but I don't even know if 45 is completed to the county line. I guess I haven't been down that way. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Coring. County Road 45 is paved. We're going to do some shoulder work and some striping. That's all that's left on 131. We're going to be doing some striping, and mailboxes is what we have, the installation. So we go through these projects. We'll replace the non-conforming mailboxes that are a little more friendly for our snowplows. So that's one of the last things on 131. We're going to be wrapping up our construction, hopefully here by the end of this month, August. Right now, we're out on County Road 3. And those of you that may be watching or have traveled that way, there was a very large backup there yesterday. And we received a lot of calls about that, and I'm apologetic for that. It was just a necessary evil to do the construction. And we have 4 other turn lines that we're going to be building, and that will wrap up our construction season for this year. We're also started our utilities on County Road 115. If you're going along there, there's a little bit of vegetation control we're doing. The utility companies are out there digging their single trench that they're going to relocate all the utilities in that. So those who live along there know that the lights flicker every time that the wind blows out there. And so hopefully that will be a big benefit to those that live out there, getting those utilities underground. And so that's what we're having undone so far. Does that answer your question, or do you need?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, and then it almost seems like we're almost ahead of schedule, because County Road 8 is done, and 131 and 45, and are all the bids that were let, are they kind of, are we kind of ahead of schedule, or, is it gonna be like freeze up before we're done, or is it?
No, we anticipate the work to be done by the end of this month with these left turn lanes, barring weather. You just approved a contract for a bridge that's up in the 2nd Assessment District. This is the one that goes out to Lower Dean Lake, and that one's going to probably linger into next year because it's very difficult to get the box culverts and the culvert materials that are needed for that one. So although I guess we wanted to do it this year, the supply is going to hinder us from actually doing it this year, is what it looks like. So that's what we're hearing from the contractor. If something changes, we'll do it as soon as we can this year.
Well, I appreciate, Mr. Chair, I'm sure that the whole board appreciates your staff's work. I know when I went and took a look at 131, I did see Mr. Dosh out there, and he was working diligently to make sure the project was completed. So just want to say thanks, because I will say that southern Crow Wing County is different than northern Crow Wing County, and I don't think in southern Crow Wing County we don't ask for too much. Just like to have some nice roads to travel in to work, and so there's a lot of nice roads now, so thanks, I appreciate it.
Can I just take an opportunity, we have these other 4 left turn lane projects, and there are going to be delays. And so look for our press releases, both in the paper and also on social media that we use at Crow Wing County. The one yesterday caught people by surprise, even though we did do that. And, look for those in the paper. There's going to be still some delays on even our high volume routes. Right there in Merrifield at 127 and 3 is going to be another large backup, and we're hoping to move into that in the next couple of weeks. So just for those that are watching, please pay attention to those press releases and try to find alternate routes around those. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair? Tim, maybe you can tell us about you just recently won a couple of Build a Better Mousetrap awards. What were those for?
Yeah, just a little background, build a better mousetrap. I think other industries do this. It's really rewarding innovative thoughts and process improvements that other counties are doing and maybe even cities. So, and then sending them into the state, all of them from around the state, and they kind of compete. There's maybe a panel that determines which is the best of the best innovative ideas around the state. That's just a quick summary of what the Better Mousetrap, and it's actually national-wide too. And so over the last couple of years, we submitted those from the Highway Department. This last year, we submitted 3 of them. One was for the snowplow, Where's My Snowplow application that we regularly use, so folks on their way to and from work or throughout the week can take a look and see where the snowplow is, if it's been in front of their home or not. We submitted that. That's a software program that really Nate Rose and Jory and others worked on hard. Another software or application that we rolled out last year and really got it going this year was our Pick a Mile program. We submitted that as an innovative idea that others might be interested in. This is our spin on the Adopt a Highway, where we, rather than a sign in the ditch, we utilize social media to reward those who come forward to help pick up our ditches. And so there's kind of a win-win for us there. And then the other one was our sign technician developed an easy way to fill sandbags with a single person. And it seems really rudimentary and simple, but when you need sandbags, you need a whole bunch of them in a hurry a lot of times. And so anything that can speed that up is a good thing. So we submitted that. I think we had a second place and a couple runners up or honorable mentions. So we did receive a plaque and actually a cash award for the Where's My Snowplow app. So we have a plaque that we're going to hang in the Highway Department for that. And so we got some recognition. So it's the innovative ideas that are coming from our employees, particularly in the highway setting. There's probably some in other areas, but we've been successful over the last couple of years, and I'm proud of our the way we think, and being able to share some of those with our colleagues around the state.
Oh, cool. Congratulations.
Very cool.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. I see Don is online. Don, do you have anything to add to this agenda today?
I do not, Mr. Chairman, thank you. But I can answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for Don? Seeing none, thank you.
Thanks.
We've still got 2 minutes. Anybody got a good joke to tell, or?
Mr. Chair, I think Jake probably needs a little bit of time to walk us through some of the summaries of what we're going to do today. And so I think that'll probably get us right to where we need to be.
Talk slow, Jake.
No, this is good. Mr. Chair and members of the board, thank you for allowing me to present just for a bit and tee it up before we start this important public hearing. We've got as you know, under land services, we've got a couple agenda items, both dealing with principally water quality, of course. The first one is our interim ordinance that was passed in April of 2022, on April 12th, which placed a moratorium on alternative access lots, controlled access lots, and boardwalks in the county's jurisdiction for planning and zoning. Since that time, in June, the county board did ask staff to draft potential revisions to that moratorium, and that moratorium, of course, as you recall, is set to expire in April of 2023. So a one-year moratorium. The reason staff was directed to look at revising that was to look at some alternatives for the boardwalk portion. As you know, the reason for this moratorium was, one, navigation or safety hazards, to ensure that that's not a problem, to ensure there's no encroachments on neighboring property or riparian rights, and out of concerns about development pressures on areas with sensitive environmental features. So keeping that in mind as the purpose of the moratorium, nothing that is being proposed to change here today, at least from a staff perspective, is going to compromise those three moratorium principles that we still intend on studying. So the revisions that are up for consideration today and a part of the public hearing is to modify the moratorium. And as you recall, on July 12th, I did go through a draft of what those changes would be. We did get some consensus here unofficially on some of the language. As you recall before, you saw in front of you language about an EAW, and that was taken out of the board's feedback. And there was language in there previously about the length of a boardwalk and the width of the boardwalk. That has also been taken out in front of what you see. Principally, what we're doing here today is, as a reminder, this is a consideration for anything above the OHW. That's what our land use ordinance regulates. This is for to allow boardwalks moving forward as part of this moratorium until we reach April, when the moratorium expires. And so this would be allowing boardwalks, so long as they are not placed on pilings that are driven into the wetlands. You could still have a boardwalk that is placed on a wetland with those classic dock sort of pedestals at the bottom of it, but not to allow them to be driven into the wetland with pilings. We would allow boardwalks that are elevated at least 1 foot from the bottom of the wetland. Boardwalks that don't encroach on the 10-foot setbacks. Still not allow boardwalks that parallel the shorelines, or none that are a part of controlled or alternative access lots. And the moratorium still prohibits alternative and controlled access lots as part of this. So it's just important to understand what the kind of the scalpel approach on this one is that we've refined. The other thing that I think is important to talk about with the boardwalks is the Board of Water and Soil Resources specifically addresses that projects that involves structures on wetlands, on posts and pilings, are not wetland fill because they are not changing the use of the wetland. And they even have guidance sheets and things like that on that. So I just want to make sure it's clear that from the Board of Water and Soil Resources perspective, state statute, things like that, boardwalks inherently do not constitute wetland impact or wetland fill. So I know there's been perhaps some discussion or comments about what a boardwalk does functionally to a wetland. So that's a little bit of a primer on what's being done to modify the moratorium. Again, it's to allow boardwalks, but still remaining moratoriumed is the controlled and alternative access lots, paralleling boardwalks, things of that nature that I know have been a topic of conversation. And with that, I see I'm past 9:15, so I'll yield my time and we can keep moving forward.
All right. At this time, we'll...
Mr. Chair, I would move that we open the public hearing on the interim ordinance number 2201 on new boardwalks and attached dock system revisions.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Coring, second by Commissioner Franzine. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. At this time, we will take public comment. If you'd like to, well, should we use these or should we?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Clay Schulte, I believe. Don't have my glasses.
Good morning. My name is Clay Schulte. I'm a physician that's been working over at Crosby.
Pull the mic down so people can hear you in the back.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Clay Schulte. I'm a physician. I've been working over at Crosby for the past several years. I'm hoping that I'm a better physician than I am public speaker. But I want to share an experience we had that I think illustrates how important it is that this moratorium on the boardwalk not be changed. I have lived on Upper Whitefish for the past 30 years. I live on this little bay. The northern end is quite swampy and is full of stumps and full of cattails. It's been a nesting area for a pair of loons. It's been a nesting area for geese. There's been bullfrogs that are so fun to listen to in the evenings. It's an environmentally sensitive area. Now, I would like to share some pictures, if I can, that shows what happens when these areas aren't protected and the impact of some of these changes. Thank you. A guy from Chicago bought 110 feet of shoreline right in the middle of this environmentally protected area. A year ago, he had Jethro Carpenter come over, and he had two very large excavators. The one came by barge, the other one worked on the shore.
Tim?
They spent 5 days destroying this sensitive habitat. Somehow, the DNR had given them a permit to dredge an area right through this wetlands. Then a few weeks later, Jethro was back with his two excavators. They spent 5 days pounding pilings and building a dock or a boardwalk or whatever the heck you want to call it that was approximately 200 feet long and maybe 5 feet wide. The DNR said they didn't have any ability to regulate boardwalks or docks. I talked to Land Services, and they said they didn't have that authority either. I got to tell you, I'm really upset about this. I mean, this has had huge impact on my little bay, and it never should have occurred, and this area should have been protected. The area is irreparably damaged. You can still hear a few bullfrogs in the evenings, but the loons haven't nested there this year. The geese haven't nested there, and I haven't seen the blue heron. And what I'm afraid of is that this is what's going to continue. We're going to slowly destroy these environmentally protected areas. And someday, we're going to wonder where the loons are. We're going to wonder where the geese are. We're going to wonder where the bullfrogs are. And that's going to be too late to do anything about it. So I strongly urge the County Commission to do everything possible to protect these sensitive wetlands. And that includes maintaining the moratorium as it's written. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony Coffey. And I forgot to mention that we do have a 3-minute limit on comments.
I'll try to stay within that.
Okay.
Good morning. You all know I'm Tony Coffey. I live in Ideal Township. I am the president of WAPOA, the Whitefish Area Property Owners Association, and the Crow Wing County Lakes and Rivers Alliance, LARA. And that is a coalition of over 30 lake associations in Crow Wing County. I'm also the principal author of the joint comment letter that was sent to you by the Gull Lake Association and the Pelican Lake Association. Collectively, we represent over 5,000 individuals and businesses and property owners who have made it a priority to conserve and protect the lakes, rivers, and streams in this county. In April of this year, you all, the county board, made the important and correct move to ban administrative subdivisions in the Shoreline District and to impose a 1-year moratorium on boardwalks, crossing wetlands in Crow Wing County. Now there is a proposal before you to walk back those decisions. Our association's comment letter lays out our concerns about the proposed changes. First, the temporary docks placed with poles would be placed with no intention of removal. Doesn't that effectively make them permanent? with the same potential risks of environmental damage. Isn't this why the moratorium was placed initially? To study the potential risk of permanent structures in wetlands. No limitation on length or width. I assume you would continue the 8-foot DNR width limit, and that would apply. But again, wasn't this part of the moratorium study? Determine what kind of size or kind of structure would be permitted, if any. The requirement for an environmental assessment worksheet has been taken out. If my points 1 and 2 are allowed, then shouldn't at least an EAW be required to assess the potential risk? If not, what form of financial indemnity will landowner developers be required to provide in the event of future environmental damage? While this is part of the second hearing, I will say it here. Administrative subdivisions allowed in the Shoreline District resulting in no public notification or comment equals no transparency. The platting and variance process is already in place. Is there any reason to not use that process for the subdivision of property in the Shoreline District, as is done in other Minnesota counties and cities? These proposed changes render the moratorium moot and give developers significant leeway to develop sensitive shoreland and adjacent wetlands. These changes are made without metrics, significant study, or public workshops to discuss these important issues with riparian owners in Crow Wing County. These proposed changes are unacceptable for those I represent and those who pay a significant portion of the property taxes in this county. We, the lake associations in Crow Wing County, strongly urge that no changes be made to the boardwalk moratorium or to the section 9.5 of the land use ordinances.
3 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One more thing. My grandsons are here this week. Our job is to protect the waters, not for them, but for their grandchildren. You made the right decision in April. Are you going to make it again?
Thank you. Next, Jeff Laurel.
Good morning.
Morning.
Yes, I am Jeff Laurel. Is this mic all right here?
Yep.
My wife and I live full-time in the Cross Lake area on Big Trout Lake. For many years, we've done water quality testing and served as Director of Natural Resources for WAPOA and assisted local government agencies with chloride testing, doing that currently, and stormwater control initiatives. I've also worked with the National Loon Center to help establish educational programs for the public to learn about loons and the water quality, how water quality affects the loons. We have 137 acres adjacent to the proposed development on Big Trout. We placed our land into conservation easement to preserve some of the natural environment there, a move which would be negated by this type of development that's being proposed. Having spent a good share of my time and my life on and around the whitefish chain, and specifically Big Trout, I am very familiar with the structure of the lakes and the natural environment of this area. Today I'm here to strongly encourage you to not accept the proposed changes to the moratorium on boardwalks, crossing wetlands, and administrative subdivisions within the Shoreline District. I believe the county, the current property owners, and future generations will all benefit by taking the long view when deciding how we will treat the beautiful lakes that we have here. Taking the longer view means careful consideration of how this increasing development pressure will affect our environment in these sensitive shoreline areas within the Shoreline District. Using the proposed administrative subdivision on Big Trout as a good example, there are documented loon nesting areas very close to the proposed boardwalk. We know that loons will very likely not nest in an area where there's high amounts of human activity. There There's also a very large area of shallow water within the proposed system of docks and boardwalks. You put a lot of boat traffic into that area on those docks in that shallow water. You're going to have a lot of prop wash stirring up the bottom sediment from the shallow water, introducing a lot of phosphorus into the lake, and thereby threatening what has been a very special lake in that Big Trout supports lake trout. I don't know how many other lakes within the county support lake trout. You probably have a good idea. So the factors I mentioned could and should be weighed in land use decisions if an environmental assessment worksheet were part of the process. Yet there's no mention of that in this proposal. And how many times in the past 5 years has an EAW been done for developments in the Shoreline District? Open question. Requiring an EAW for this type of development should not be viewed as an unreasonable hardship for the developer, who is, after all, treating the leveraging of our natural resources as a business opportunity. So this is a business
3
expense.
minutes is up, sir. If you could just wrap up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Jethro Carpenter. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Jethro Carpenter. Not much for publicity, and don't. If I had a choice of if I would have bought this property, I probably wouldn't have. In fact, I offered to sell it to WAPOA, which they declined to buy it. But I am here mainly just as a proponent of boardwalks. It's relatively simple. There's not a lot of options beside boardwalks. In fact, the boil, soil, and water it's a preferred method, the best practice, and the preferred one for more than 20 years. The other choice is fill or dredging, which neither are a very good choice. Piling, so we, particularly on this project for Trout Lake, we had a TEP panel meeting, which I'm sure you guys all know what that is, but it includes land services, the DNR, the BOWSR, the boil or board of soil and water, and I think it has Crow County soil and water there also. It actually resulted in a no loss for the determination of it, which I have here. I don't know if you guys want to see it, but essentially piling, whether it's steel posts or wood posts, are the best practice for putting boardwalks in and result in a no loss. I also have your guys' Crow County's for cheat sheet for putting boardwalks in. And per it says, posts and pilings are needed to support boardwalks, as an elevated boardwalk is a reasonable and prudent alternative to use and fill, which is, again, your guys' words, not mine. That pretty much wraps up the stuff. I have a bunch of information here, which I'm not sure you guys need everything, but really the bottom line is boardwalks are by far the best use of accessing shoreline, and probably the one that I actually do need to cover is, so per the DNR, they have what is your riparian rights, right? So riparian rights are riparian rights are property rights arise from owning shoreland. They include the right to wharf out to navigable waters, to take water for domestic and agricultural purposes, to use the land, to use the land to take ice, fish, boat, hunt, swim, or to such other water body activities. So it's just a broader question. If you don't allow people to have boardwalks, how do they gain access?
Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Take care.
John Bruder?
Well, good morning. I live in District 2. Commissioner, thank you for your service. My name's John Bruder. My wife and I live at 11171 Swanberg Drive on Big Trout Lake. We're residents there, homesteaded there, and we like it there. It's very nice. I do have the pleasure of fishing in my little 14-foot boat out in front of the wetlands, and it's very nice. And we'd like for it to stay like it is. In April this year, we became aware that there was some development discussion about the wetlands on Big Trout Lake. And we're about 7 cabins, I guess you'd say, from the beginning of the wetlands going west. We contacted Timothy Township, where we live, and we did find out from them that it was true that there was some wetland development under discussion. We sent in our letter of opposition requesting an environmental study, of course, to be completed. It did seem odd to us that we had no notification as residents near the proposed development. We weren't notified of any public hearings, which was unusual, we thought. So we were really totally unaware of the wetland development and didn't have an opportunity to participate. Later on, I wrote a letter to Land Services, email actually, just checking the status of the wetland application and development. And Crow Wing County Land Services did respond via email on July 14th. Quote, "The entire application and filing process has been postponed indefinitely for this parcel, period. Nothing on this application is active at this time." That was July 14th, less than a month ago. I guess we can't pose questions for answers, but I'll just hang a question out there. We have no idea what took place. And I think that's because there was no public hearing. So we're opposed. We believe that as I understand it, the existing moratorium that was passed should stay in place as is. And we also believe that an environmental study is completely called for in this situation. And I am curious. I always thought the DNR had the job of protecting our wetlands and had played some role in that. And I don't know anybody at the DNR, but I'm curious if they've been engaged in this process and what their reactions have been. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, John Fournay, I believe.
Good morning. My name is John Forney. My wife and I are residents and property owners on the Whitefish chain for the last 32 years. I've been active in a lot of organizations with regard to lakes, rivers, and our wildlife. I'm the former president of WAPOA. I'm a board director on the Pine River Watershed Alliance. I am chair of the Cross Lakers Water Quality Work Group. And I'm also the current president of the National Loon Center Foundation. I'm here today to oppose the proposed changes. Now, as you know, we have 10,000 lakes. That's as many as we're going to get. They stopped making them millions of years ago. Unfortunately, the lakes in the southern half of Minnesota have already succumbed to man. They're no longer part of the land of sky blue waters. So now we're facing a similar situation in this part of the state. Ongoing and increasing development pressures on remaining marginal riparian properties are squeezing out the last foot of land around our magnificent lakes. The pressure will spoil the waters, turn them cloudy, weed choked. The fish will no longer be abundant. That will happen. That has happened already in our state. Now, just to let you know the impact of what you're considering, the National Loon Center delivered 3 dead loons to the University of Minnesota last week for necropsy to determine what they died from. Among those, 2 loon chicks. We'll probably deliver 18, 20 dead loons this summer alone. It's part of succumbing to man here. But we have to draw a line someplace on how much we're going to allow to be developed. There is a level at which the lakes just can't survive. So we just have to say no. So when the loons are gone, the lakes will be dead. The loons are the canary in the coal mine. With regard to water quality, I've been testing water on the chain for 32 years. I know what's happening on the chain. Water quality is definitely declining. So we need to deal with that. I looked at the comp plan for the county, and it states a strong economy, social well-being, and a healthy environment are not mutually exclusive, but interdependent. It also notes Crow Wing County's rich natural resources and scenic beauty distinguish it from other Minnesota counties.
Our 3 minutes are up, if you could wrap up quick.
Okay, I'll give you one last piece. That's this piece right here from the DNR. I'll read it quickly. It says, restrictions on docks and other structures. You may not place a dock or other structure in public waters if the structure is detrimental to fish or wildlife habitat or is placed in a posted fishing spawning area. So if you want this, I'll gladly pass it along. That's the DNR's position. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff, David, just David?
Jeff Davidge. Spelled with a G.
Hi, Jeff Davidge. I am the current Natural Resource Director of Wappoa. My family and my wife's family have lived on Lower Whitefish Lake, right next to Boyd's Lodge and the Schweeters since 1956. Currently, all my property is in a land trust, environmentally protected forever, which is great news. Here's a couple of things. You voted to keep this moratorium unchanged until April 2023. Now I see that we need to amend it. Well, whatever. We have no idea what an environmentally sensitive feature is, do we? Until we destroy it. Boardwalks are gateways to 1, invasive species, and 2, alternative transportation, which includes transporting those invasive species into the water. 3, this violates the Federal Migratory Bird Act of 1918, which says disturbing migratory nesting areas is against federal law, which supersedes state and local ordinances. This pertains to killing, disturbing nests, anything having to do with migratory birds. And has John so appointedly proven that loons are migratory, along with a few other species.
And lastly, I don't know, people who have bought property knowing it has no clear access to the lake, what do they expect? Should we give them better treatment than people that have lived there for many years? Just asking. That's all I have. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Next, I believe there's a couple on Teams. Mr. Severson.
Yes, hi, good morning, Crow Wing County Board. I appreciate first your technology and your embrace of it so I can be here with you this morning from Montana. So I'm here with Friends of Crow Wing County Lakes. It's a nonprofit that was formed to advocate for Crow Wing County Lakes. Just before I start some comments, I wanted to note that you've heard from many people already, and I'll note that in the packet you really had no submissions trying to offset or advocate against revising the moratorium. And that I believe that's because we were given direction to send it to an email of a staffer that has been out of the office, and for whatever reason the submissions weren't received. So I'm noting that just for the board's consideration as a reason that could make sense to table this meeting and the consideration of advancing the moratorium to changes. So in April, the moratorium was enacted to allow time for careful study and review and placement of boardwalks attached to dock systems or within the shoreline zone. From what we can be aware of, it does not appear that any such efforts have taken place. That's a lot of what you're hearing this morning. We're aware of no workshop studies, solicitation of input from appropriate third parties, or really any efforts. Then out of nowhere last month, this board was asked to scale back the moratorium, or the board asked the staff to scale it back, as we learned from Mr. Fry. If there were additional due diligence items taken that the public or the group I represent is simply unaware of, please let us know of those efforts so we can be less skeptical. But right now it appears to be a healthy skepticism. It also appears that shortly after this board passed the moratorium, changes to scale it back were worked out only internally. Even if this is what the county wants to do, it's very imprudent action and unnecessarily creates additional legal vulnerabilities for the county on each end of the spectrum by making it look like the moratorium was targeted against one developer, or that it was enacted without any seriousness into what comes with it. So to that end, even if you read the proposed changes on the table and deem those changes to be logical, seriously consider the due diligence and knowledge that these changes are based upon. If there are still multiple open questions regarding best practices for boardwalks and the moratorium must stay in place, then the moratorium must stay in place, with direction from the board to solicit input from third parties such as the DNR, lake associations, environmental groups, developers. Hear from all ends of the spectrum. Don't just try to work this out internally. Your staff is wonderful. We have a lot of talent in our county, but let's maximize the brain power here. So we recommend no modifications to the moratorium, no modifications to the ordinance. Keep the language as is. Moratoriums are designed to stop what may otherwise or eventually be deemed as acceptable development. The point of it is to allow for intelligent design in our zoning laws. If we pass moratoriums with no effort other than what is done internally, we are not being serious as a county board. Keep it as is and use the draconian nature of a moratorium as motivation to work hard and exercise all required due diligence within the next year. You did the right thing in April by starting this process. Now start it and see it through. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, he said we recommend. Who is this again? Who is he and who does he represent?
Mr. Severson, I believe, is the attorney for, is WAPOA, is that correct? Or
who you said we recommend? Who is that? Who's we?
Yes, Mr. Coring, I represent Friends of Crow Wing County Lakes. It's a nonprofit that was formed to advocate for the health of Crow Wing County lakes. And we also have the support of GCOLA and WAPOA.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else online that would care to speak? Seeing no, oh,
Could I raise my hand?
yep,
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm on a voice call rather than a Zoom call. My name is Diane Brower Celesta, and I have lived on Whitefish Bay across from the Rutgers Point for 60 years during the summer. My father was one of the original cabin builders here, and we have a love of the lakes and a love of the wildlife. And I don't have anything technical to add, but I would support everything that every speaker has said, with the exception of Mr. Carpenter, in that we need to protect the waters. Over these 60 years, I have seen a decline in the water quality. I've seen a decline in the wildlife that we see. And this is a place that I love and treasure and value. And I would just like to raise my hand and my voice with the other residents who live here and have invested their lives and their emotion in the wildlife here, and just keep that in mind. And again, I support doing some studies and providing that information to us residents. What do the environmental studies actually show? What will these changes actually impact and do before we move forward and then go, oops, we made another mistake. So that's all I've got to say. So thank you very much.
thank you. Anyone else online? All right, seeing none. Anybody else in the audience that?
Denny Gaylor, I'm a property owner on Big Trout Lake. So I graduated from Chautauqua High School in Wisconsin in 1970. Here's why it's important. Chautauqua is a chain of 6 lakes, and it's a tourist area for people from primarily Milwaukee and Chicago. In 1970, there was no visual look that the lake was being contaminated and destroyed. In 1985, that became visible. In 1995, an association was formed to protect and reclaim the chain of 6 lakes for the purpose of the economy and the environment. That work continues today. My reason for sharing the story is to try to wrap up some of the comments that you've heard. What may not be visible today, what data that you're reviewing that may not be alarming, has consequences, and I'd propose to you that one of the actions that you can take is what you took April 12th by creating a moratorium to study all of the implications using both qualitative and quantitative data and scientific evidence. So I'd request that you oppose, or that you do not make any modifications to the moratorium as has been proposed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mitch Brinks, owner Brinks Wetland Services, 11914 Baxter, Minnesota, or Joneswood Circle, Baxter, Minnesota. I just want to address the board on this boardwalks issue. I'm a big fan of lake protection. I can't disagree with much of what was said as to the threats of our lakes. And certainly we have a variety of tools in the toolbox to protect our lakes, from BMPs to ordinances to land trusts to buying land, conservation easements. However, once that land has been developed and folks live on the lake and want access to the shoreline, there's really only 2 alternatives, and that is a path that's filled or a boardwalk. And when I used to work for Crow Wing County as as the water protection specialist, one of my jobs was administering the Wetland Conservation Act, as many of you know. And we used to deny people all the time who wanted to put in fill paths to the lake. And the reason we could deny them was because we had this alternative, and that was the elevated boardwalk. And so if we go back to the moratorium and totally take away boardwalks, you're going to be faced with the unintended consequence of really having no other option from the Wetland Conservation Act standpoint of having to approve fill paths to the lake. Because the rule states you have to avoid the wetland, and if there's no reasonable and prudent alternative to avoid the wetland, then you should allow the fill path. So, strongly encourage you to do what Jake is proposing here with the boardwalks. I'm not an expert on the posts and pilings. I will say that I've seen some of these sensitive areas, like you look at the North Shore, you go up north of Bemidji to the peatlands area. Long permanent boardwalks with posts and pilings protecting some of the most sensitive areas of our state. So I guess I'm a little unclear on the damage that posts and pilings would cause. So I would be in favor of allowing permanent posts and pilings because that's been practice. And finally, I just want to address the issue of environmental assessment worksheets or EAWs. And I think it is prudent to not require them. I just think it's, to be honest, I've written or reviewed EAWs for 20 years now, and you just don't gain the information that you think you want to gain out of an EAW. And it's just not set up to get you a site-specific scientific answer to any of the questions that would relate to like a specific boardwalk proposal. They're bigger and broader, and they're a great moneymaker for us as consultants, but they really don't. They're kind of a waste of time and money, to be honest, for some of these situations. So, thank you.
Thanks, Mitch. Anybody else in the audience?
I wasn't intending to speak, but I'm Susan Coring, 12806 Morningside Drive on Merrifield, where the boardwalk issue is on the end of our road. Came about that all of a sudden we had a number and not knowing where that was, so it took a while before we were even aware that that was happening. As Mr. Coffey had spoken, representing the Pelican Lake Association as one entity, but I'm also representing probably the 17 homeowners along the road who have an impact on this whole issue also, because being that my father owned property on the south end of the lake prior to my time, we've been on this particular road since 1955. And the preserving of the wetland, down on the road, and the new people coming in there, it's vital for all of us. So I suggest you stick with the moratorium as stated. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, there's other people on the line. Or am I able to speak? This is Ann and Tom Moose. We're at 1175 Northgate Lane.
Okay, yep.
On Big Trout Lake. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. So appreciate everyone's comments and attention to this matter, and thank you for the past consideration of all of our submissions to the county, including hundreds of petitions requesting environmental evaluations of wetland areas. I mean, 'cause clearly at this point, we're talking about development and focusing on development on marginal areas. So, you know, one of the questions I would pose to the board is how many individuals are actually impacted by this. I understand the comment by the previous gentleman on this topic in support of boardwalks and other activities over wetlands, but to other comments that were made by Mr. Laurel and others, we're actually at the point, we're at the tipping point. And how many people are actually buying land that are impacted, you know, by this issue? I find it hard to believe that there is a substantial number of individuals, so I would ask the board to consider why are they modifying how many people are actually impacted and who is requested, that requested boardwalks at this point in time. Also earlier, Jake and others, Mr. Fry and others referenced Bowser, the DNR, as being included in discussions. I would ask if they've been invited to the table, then I would hope they would have been present for this meeting, or their comments and communications would have been shared and available to the rest of the parties at this meeting. So I would pose that question as well. And then to dovetail on one of my other comments in terms of how many folks are actually impacted, given we are at the point where we're, again, you know, I know I'm feeling passionate about this, but we're really at marginal wetlands here, right, is what we're trying to develop. And when development's focused on marginal wetlands, we're kind of at the decline of the overall lake environment, similar to Mr. Geller's comments. There are variance processes already existing within the ordinances that can provide the county the flexibility. So I would ask the board, rather than modifying the April moratorium or land use ordinance, and I realize that's the next topic, but I'll speak now, why not keep it all as is and leverage existing variance processes for those folks that need to accomplish what they need to accomplish based on the land that they have? Because that's already available and is already flexible. And then I just think overall public notification of public notification of activity in this regard and transparency is extremely important. Because based on my understanding, the DNR must review and approve all local shoreland ordinances and amendments according to state law. So I again would ask the question and hope that that's part of the process as well. So again, thank you for your time. I guess I'm probably running up on 3 minutes here, and I again will reiterate on our behalf that we are opposed to any changes to the moratorium with regards to boardwalk. And again, I'll state it here, I know this is the next topic, we're also opposed to any changes to the land use ordinance that was adopted in April of 2022 regarding alternative subdivisions. Thank you for your time and attention. Appreciate all of your efforts and focus on this important issue.
Thank you. All right, I think we've heard from everybody. One last shot at it. Anybody? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we close the public hearing on the interim ordinance number 2201, new boardwalks, attached dock systems revisions.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Coring, second by Commissioner Franzine to close the public hearing. We'll bring it back to the board.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. All right. Who wants to start?
Well, Mr. Chair, if I can, I'll start off with this, but I first want to recognize Land Services and the workload that they're carrying right now. And it's been a very busy spring and summer for them, and I think last week they had actually 18 site visits in regards to Planning Board of Adjustments. So the workload that their staff is working on is very heavy. So I think with that, it may have taken away the opportunity to really build on our study. And I think as we as county commissioners, our responsibility is to set policy so that the staff can work through and have the parameters of how to manage the process and in this particular case, our waters. And I want to stay strictly on the boardwalks. I think that the questions are still there in regards to permanent versus temporary, and I think that we heard from Mr. Brinks that the permanent pilings are still probably, again, the best to go with, but we need to know that for sure. We've talked a little bit about widths. I did have a handicapped person contact in regards to his concern about the width of that and his access and ability to do that, so I think we have to look into those things a little bit further. We've talked, do we want to limit motorized vehicles or not limit motorized vehicles? That again goes into the width of our property there. And we've never really determined the length of a boardwalk in regards to, is it 100 feet, 200 feet, if it falls something in between there, or is it access to open water? So I think it still continues to raise a number of issues. And most recently, somebody brought up to me the concept of floodplains. Are there areas that sometimes when water levels are high, they have access to water, and water levels are low, they don't. So I think there's a lot of research and study that has to go on to be able to find out and for us to decide what kind of policy we actually want to set.
Thank you, Bill. Anyone else?
And Mr. Chair, just so I think everybody understands, we are not getting rid of the moratorium. We are, I don't know, I guess for lack of a better word, we're tweaking the moratorium. Would you say that's what we're doing?
Commissioner Coring, we're just modifying it, revising the moratorium.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. I will say that I appreciate everyone's comments, but the fact that Crow Wing County has several types of lakes, people purchase these lots that are probably not as desirable, but with that, they expect the access to their lake. That is the reason you buy a lake home or a lake lot. And again, to modify this, I think we're only talking the basic boardwalks. I think what got us here was some of the more, the larger boardwalks that created a lot of concern. If we dial back to where we were prior to the moratorium, there was really no concern or issues over the standard boardwalks. And I guess that said, we will continue the study for these larger boardwalks. I've heard EAWs, that's not off the table for some of these more extravagant boardwalks. But to deny a person access to their lake, to me, also creates a whole new issue. And with the revision that we're talking, I think it's a fair compromise that will allow these people to use their property as they planned when they purchased it. And I guess I'll leave it at that for now. I do have one question for Jake, though. As we heard from Mitch, the post versus filings, is that in the language for the revision?
Mr. Chair, the language currently states that a dock constructed with piling specifically driven into the wetland would still not be allowed. We would allow boardwalks that are not piling into the wetland.
Okay, and then to that point, I guess I would suggest we include that to Commissioner Brecken's point, that we're not in and out of these wetland areas every year, pulling them in and then putting them back out. To me, would create much more damage to the wetland areas. So that said, I'll let others talk, and then we can decide what to do.
Mr. Chair, if I might, my position is that we made a decision on April 12th to have a moratorium for a year. And I understand that there's some concerns for people who have purchased property and now are not going to be able to access the water. But the purpose of the moratorium to me was to be able to take the time to step back and study the impact to these lakes and to our rivers. And so for me, I still believe, and I know I've had extensive talks with Jake and have a better understanding of what Bowser has for guidelines out there for these boardwalks and that, but I still believe that taking a year to study this and then come back with all the facts, that would give us the opportunity to really make that decision that we'll make at that time. So I'm still in favor of what we did and the action we took on April 12th. Thank you.
Well, and I still believe that it's necessary to do the study, and so I like the year.
Mr. Chairman, I would make the motion that we, the county board, approve the request for board action to make modifications to the new boardwalks, attached dock systems, and revisions. And Mr. Chairman, I would incorporate in the appropriate place what you said about pilings, where the appropriate place would be. I'm not sure, I'm not seeing it on here where that would be the appropriate place, but I would incorporate that into my motion.
All right. We have a motion by Commissioner Coring. Is there a second? I will hand the meeting over to Commissioner Brecken and second the motion.
Mr. Chair, you need not hand the gavel for a second.
All right, I will second that. Motion by Mr. Goring, second by Commissioner Hoag. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion fails. All right. Next. Jake, do you want to cue this one up?
Yep, certainly, Mr. Chair, thank you, and members of the board. We'll scoot right along here to the second item. I know we'll have a public hearing for this one as well, but I'm just sort of teeing it up a bit to frame up exactly kind of the history and where we're going here. So, as you know, on April 12th, the county board approved various revisions to the land use ordinance, which included, in this case, reason for this discussion is changing the ordinance to state that in the Shoreline district, 1,000 feet from a lake, 300 feet from a river, 500 feet from the Mississippi, that any splits that are less than 10 acres and less than 300 feet in width would need to go through a platting process instead of an administrative subdivision that would be handled sort of over the counter in that way. So that was a significant change enacted in April. In June of this year, the county board did direct staff to consider further revisions to that land use ordinance related to administrative subdivisions and platting in general and in the Shoreline district. And just to be clear, we're no longer talking about a moratorium now. This is a permanent change to the land use ordinance. So we're sort of shifting from this April thing from the boardwalk to more of a permanent change. On July 12th, you provided feedback for some proposed language revisions that staff had considered based on direction. And so we feel like we had good feedback there and pretty clear direction. We also took those changes to the Planning Commission at their July 21st meeting to make sure they were understanding of some of the changes that were going on. It wasn't a public hearing, that's where today is, but they did unanimously recommend these proposed revisions to the land use ordinance. So with that, I want to go over just very briefly the three broad revisions that are being made today. The first is Article 4.4a, which will revise the ordinance to state that anytime we have ordinance revisions, they will go into effect as soon as the board makes a decision, rather than the previous language which stated 30 days from the date of the decision. And so that delay can create problems with, having a decision made and then moving forward with that new practice. So that is a decision for you to consider today in front of you. The second, and most significantly, is Article 9.5, which is our administrative subdivision portion of our ordinance, which is proposed to be revised to state that riparian lots in the Shoreline district, those that touch the bed of public waters, would still be mandated if they're going to be split and they're less than 10 acres, less than 300 feet in width, would still be required to do platting. And the reason that's being proposed, one, board direction. Two, if we look at the environmental concerns that we typically see for public bodies of water, when we see the interface of these floodplain zones, we see the interface of wetland complexes, surface water runoff, intensive development, things like that, we're typically seeing those principally in these riparian lots, which really form that interface between the public waters and the upland areas. So we know that decision to have plats be in the Shoreline district was to sort of get at that issue. We think that this fine-tuning of that result really drives home the result that was being looked for, which was to get at that interface before the public waters where those wetlands are principally located. So what would happen if they're not riparian lots, but they're still in the Shoreline district? So as an example, not touching the water, but still within 1,000 feet of a lake, is we would go back to, on those splits, a certain number of properties over a certain number of years would be allowed, similar to the previous language that we have. So it wouldn't be an indefinite free-for-all outside of the riparian lots. There would still be the counter that would be attached, and that language is in the ordinance, as you can see, as proposed. So there's still going to be a threshold cutoff for plats outside of the riparian areas, and it would still be an administrative subdivision. Lastly, and this was a recent addition, this is Article 46.2, number 9, and what this is saying is this is really just cleaning up a definition in the ordinance that we have that may have been a remnant. And what this definition says, currently a division of land that may occur once every 3 years. What we're proposing to change here is to make sure that the definition in the back matches the practice and the actual performance language in Article 9.5 for administrative subdivisions, which doesn't unilaterally say that you can only have an administrative subdivision once every 3 years. And so this is just simply matching the language in Article 0.5 to the definition and revising it to say that an administrative subdivision is anything that really meets Articles 9.5 and 9.6 as prescribed. So really that when we see those cleanup opportunities, when we see some discrepancies there, we want to make sure we clean those up. And I know that wasn't discussed July 12th, but we thought it was prudent to bring that forward. So I think that's a fairly comprehensive tee-up. I'm happy to take any questions. Otherwise, we can move from there.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would move to open the public hearing on land use ordinance revisions.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Coring, second by Commissioner Barrows. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. At this time, public comment. Is there anyone that would care to speak towards this revision?
Denny Gaylor again, still on Trout Lake. I would encourage you to oppose the revisions, and my purpose is because I've had an opportunity since all this came about to have conversations with the Timothy Township Board. Previously, I was not active in that, and I've learned a fair amount through that. I've been requested by their Timothy Township Board to participate, and the county has been asked for Timothy Township to weigh in on the new comprehensive planning process for the next 20 years. And I'll be working with seasonal and permanent residents to provide that information. The reason that I'm opposed to the administrative subdivisions is because of transparency. Clearly, in my conversations with Timothy Township Board, there's been concerns about the intentions and actions within the township that are under the governance of the county. And so I would encourage you to leave, excuse me? Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? I don't know what that means.
Okay, so what specifically, in attendance myself, I don't believe anybody else was there except the Timothy Township Board. The concern is that they've misunderstood what the intentions of the development of the properties within the township. And what also, frankly, their level of involvement and what opportunities they have to weigh in on recommendations that are not specific to their responsibility, but they certainly have an opportunity to weigh in, and they were unaware that they could do that. And so bottom line is I'm not speaking for them because you'd have to ask them to make a formal statement on their behalf, but my understanding would be that their concern is about transparency and knowing full well what they can do and if things are being represented the way they believe they're going to play out.
Well, Mr. Chair, for full transparency, and this is for everybody in the room, any township can do their own planning and zoning. If you don't like Crow Wing County and you think we're the worst people ever, more power to you. Tell Timothy Township to do their own planning and zoning. I have one township in my district, Crow Wing Township. They do their own planning and zoning. Ideal Township does their own planning and zoning. I encourage it, because there's just so many, you come here and you think that we're trying to do bad things to the lakes. That couldn't be further from the truth. But if you think the townships can do a better job, more power to you.
Actually, I would say that their intention, at least as I would understand it, Commissioner, is they want to leverage their insight locally with the resources and the insight on a more larger scale. And so it's not an it's not an accusation. It's a interest on at least from what I'm hearing, on the part of the township to more participate and also leverage what they have access to in terms of resources within the community.
Well, Mr. Chair, so I will say that I represent a lot of townships, and do I listen to my townships? Absolutely, because they're elected by the same people that elect me. But they have delegated that authority to the county, and I think we go through this stuff with a fine-tooth comb. And sometimes I think the majority of the time I agree with my townships, but there's times that I don't agree with my townships. But then if they get mad at me, I just say, you can do your own planning and zoning. I mean, if you're that frustrated. So I think, Timothy Township, transparency, at their meeting, they can have a resolution and send that to the county board. And then when we have our meeting, it'll be right here. They can send it right to Therese, and she'll have it right here on our desk. And we'll know what their position is.
If I might add just one other thing, I would say today they would have a better knowledge of what you just said than they would have had 3 months ago.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody online?
Oh, yep.
Yes, if I may.
Yep. Yes.
Hi, Mark Severson again, Friends of Crow Wing County Lakes. A lot of the same arguments you've heard could basically be cut and paste into reasons for not moving forward on this change as well. So in the interest of time, I'll incorporate by reference all past arguments. But then, I don't know how well you can see what's behind me, but there's obviously a mountain range, and I only point this out because in Montana, just so happens to be that the mountains are what valued in the same way that lakes are in Minnesota. And it would be unthinkable for a developer to be able to go through these mountains and do an internal administrative type application to develop and subdivide land. Just going through even local ordinances here, it's a basic plat process, and it's really built on common sense. There's a lot of factors that are important. People come to these meetings and share feedback for a reason, but then also just making sure that as a county, our land is developed the way we want it to be developed. So again, I'm just asking the board to tread carefully, even if there's a interest to really try to scale things back. Take the same approaches you just did. Don't move too quickly, because this is your chance now to really set the table the right way for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, this is Tom Moots on the line. If I could say a few comments, please.
Sure.
Thank you again, Commissioners, for your time and diligence. This is obviously a lot of complexities to it that Land Services has had to go through. I do want to remind the Commissioners of a couple of things that were previously discussed. You know, there was a moratorium put on platted subdivisions for a reason in the Shoreline District. I don't see why we wouldn't keep the administrative subdivision in place and the restrictions until we've completed these moratorium things, especially when we're talking about private easements like on Big Trout Lake, from a safety and public safety perspective. Additionally, I want to remind everyone, because we haven't heard officially what has been occurring, but the DNR must review and approve all local shoreline ordinances and amendments. And our contest is relative to administrative subdivisions. It is in the Shoreline District. This is part of the ordinances, yet we're saying that it's going to be effective immediately if you vote yay. Not quite understanding what that process is, but it seems to me there's been references to Bowser and DNR, yet they're absent from these meetings, and we don't understand where their involvement is and why they haven't been invited to the table. With that, I'd just like to reiterate that you already have the flexibility in the ordinances with the variance process, and don't see why that wouldn't continue to be leveraged, especially when we're talking about such few properties within the Shoreline District that this occurs. Because if it is communities that we're talking about that are within the Shoreline District, well, don't they already have the potential, shoreline communities where they should be platted anyways and or reviewed by city planners? With that, I'll send it back to the Commissioners. But again, thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you again. My concern in regards to this part of the ordinance is strictly transparency, as Denny Geller talked about. A property was going to be added onto on our street. We live on a little lane with about 9-10 homes, but a property was going to be added onto. I got a notification because there was a variance request to the county. The Carpenter property on the north end of Trout, none of his neighbors, none of the people around there knew of that potential subdivision because it was being done as an administrative subdivision. To not have these things done, to have administrative subdivisions allowed within the Shoreline District is inappropriate. I believe this board strongly supports the Mississippi Headwaters Board. They have control of the Mississippi 1,000 feet from the shoreline, if I understand that correctly.
500.
500, sorry. Okay, well then let's just make the shoreline impact zone larger. But the point is that realistically 1,000 feet from the lake is nothing in terms of what really flows into the lake. We all know that. And so it's important for transparency and for the health of these lakes that we do not allow administrative subdivisions within the Shoreline District. Thank you.
I just want to mention, I'm not sure that people really understand, like if you were to draw a 1,000-foot circle around every lake in Crow Wing County, there's not a whole lot of land left, right? So, and the people that are going to be able to utilize this administrative subdivision as you guys wrote it are the ones that are working right now. They're not here to be able to represent themselves because they don't live on the lakes and they probably don't find it necessary because they're out working, but I think it's a pretty prudent deal. However people view the administrative subdivision that I did it legally. I followed all the rules, and that's a separate issue. But I don't own any land outside of Shoreline District, but I think that for your constituents that actually vote, that are working today, I think that this is a pretty fair policy for the guy that wants to split some land off for his kids to live on or build a garage or whatever. That's all I have to say. Thanks again for you guys' time, and I appreciate whether or not everything is not always in my favor, but I do appreciate your guys' job. It's not terribly easy. There's always a lot of emotion involved in these deals.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Clay Schulte here again. Boy, I'm such a simple guy, and I look up at Article X and Section Z, and I get quite confused by things. But from my very simple way of looking at things, why would we want to have administrative subdivision? What's the advantage to it? Does it make it easier to divide land? Does it make it easier to sell it or to make money? I don't think there's any reason that we'd want to do that. I think it ought to be platted. I think it ought to be looked at. I think it ought to be thought through in a meaningful kind of way before we do things like that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Just to answer his question, and when you plat something, there's real expenses in it. I mean, compared to, so it comes down to like off-lake lots are not exceptionally valuable. And normally when they're getting done by a family or whatever, that it's sheer expense and time. Like it takes a lot of time, more time to plat, and it's a sheer cost.
Thanks. All right. Seeing no other comments,
I just want to make a comment. You know, a couple of people have said transparency. I think this board in Crow Wing County is very transparent. What worries me about that is, I think that the thing that we never even mentioned here is property rights. People buy property. Don't they have any rights? Do they have any rights on that property at all? Or do we have all the citizens telling them what they can and can't do on their property? I mean, it's a fine line between property rights and, you know, there's just the other day we had to clean up somebody's property and put the bill on their property taxes. And yes, I understand that we have to have rules and regulations because there's just some people that will abuse it. But we got to be careful about, you go down that road of taking away people's rights, their property rights, their constitutional rights. You know, be careful about taking away people's rights too much. You know, shake your head no. You've got your place on the lake. I don't want anybody else here. Don't bother me. You know, I mean, that's kind of the way it feels sometimes. So.
Mr. Chair, hearing no other comments, I would make a motion to close the public hearing.
A second.
We have a motion by Commissioner Barrow, second by Commissioner Coring to close the public hearing. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Again, what are the wishes?
Mr. Chair, if I could, Jake, if I can ask you a question. Administrative subdivisions, who's notified of those?
Just the applicant, the surveyor, and staff. There is no public official notification on that.
To neighbors or townships?
That's correct. Okay. Prior to it being approved, of course. Once it's approved, everyone gets to see it, but yeah.
Mr. Chair, and for clarification, Jake, this is 1,000 feet away from the riparian, or the water, correct?
So Commissioner Barrows, just to be clear, the revision would state that riparian lots, that those lots that are touching the public waters would go through a platting process.
Right.
Those that are still within the Shoreline District, which is 1,000 feet from the lake, that are not touching the water, would be allowed to go through an administrative subdivision process, so long as they're still within the Shoreline District.
Okay.
I think, again, when this was introduced to us, similar to the earlier public hearing, I'll be the first to admit I acted too soon on it without considering some of the issues. Prior to that, all we were hearing was issues with riparian lots and not considering, you know, those that might be to the backside of these lots. As the gentleman said, currently there's thousands of dollars that a applicant needs to put up front, and then it goes in front of our Board of Adjustment, and it may or may not be approved. That falls a little bit to the property rights. And again, from a property to the backside of the shoreland impact zone, there's plenty of filter, plenty of buffer to, and if a water plan or stormwater plan, whatever, I mean, there's a ton of opportunity, and I think it would have minimal, if any, impact on the shoreland for these non-riparian lots. So I'm going to leave it at that. It's,
Mr. Chairman, I would move the request for board action on the land use ordinance revisions that are outlined here in the request for board action.
we have a motion by Commissioner Coring. Is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
Second by Commissioner Barrows. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, that motion passes 4-1. All right.
Mr. Chairman, if there's no other business to come before the county board, I would move adjournment of the county board.
Any other?
I'll second that motion.
All right. Motion by Commissioner Coring, second by Commissioner Barrows to adjourn. Thank you.